My 7-year-old son was undergoing emergency spinal surgery, and my family couldn't even send a text. But when they demanded $3,000 a week later, they forgot one crucial detail. I own the roof over their heads. So, I sent $1 and initiated their eviction. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The smell of a hospital waiting room is something you never really forget. It's a specific cocktail of antiseptic floor cleaner, stale coffee, and raw, unfiltered anxiety. I was sitting in a chair that seemed designed to be uncomfortable, a hard blue plastic that dug into my lower back, staring at the double doors that led to the surgical wing. Above the doors, a digital clock ticked away the seconds in bright red LED numbers. 10:14 a.m. My son, Archie, had been in there for 3 hours. I looked down at my phone for the 100th time in the last 20 minutes. The screen was black, no notifications, no missed calls, no texts. My hands were trembling slightly, a combination of too much caffeine and the terrified adrenaline that only a mother knows. I unlocked the phone and opened the family group chat again, just to make sure the messages had actually gone through. Sarah, yesterday, 8:00 p.m. Doctors say Archie needs emergency decompression surgery tomorrow morning. It's his spine. It's serious. We're at Mercy General. Sarah, today, 6:30 a.m. They're prepping him now. He's scared. I'm scared. Please keep your phones on. Sarah, today, 7:15 a.m. He's gone in. I'll update you when I can. I stared at the read receipts. They were there, staring back at me like tiny, silent accusations. Read by Mom at 8:05 p.m. Read by Edward at 9:00 p.m. They knew. My mother, Rachel, knew. My brother, Edward, knew. They had seen the messages. They had seen the pleas for support, the terror plainly written in text form, and the response was absolutely nothing. A void. I looked around the waiting room. Across from me, a large family was huddled together. An older woman was holding the hand of a younger man, perhaps her son, while a man who looked like a brother paced back and forth, bringing them water. They were a unit, a fortress against the fear. I was an island. I gripped Archie's favorite stuffed dinosaur, a tattered green T-Rex named Chomp, so hard that my knuckles turned white. Archie had tried to be brave before the anesthesia took hold. He had looked up at me with those big, trusting brown eyes, his small hand gripping my finger. "Mommy, will you be there when I wake up?" he had whispered, his voice slurring slightly from the medication. "I will be right here, baby," I had promised, choking back tears so he wouldn't see me cry. "And Grandma and Uncle Edward will probably be calling to check on you too." I had lied to him. I didn't know I was lying at the time, but as the hours dragged on and the silence from my phone deepened, the realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I wasn't just worried about the surgery anymore. I was beginning to feel a cold, creeping sensation of abandonment. I have always been the strong one, the one with the career in supply chain management, the one who fixes things, the one who organizes the family reunions and pays for the turkeys and handles the crises. But right now, I was just a terrified mother sitting alone in a hallway that smelled like bleach, realizing that the people who were supposed to be my bedrock were made of sand. A nurse in blue scrubs pushed through the double doors. "Family of Archie." I shot up from the chair so fast I nearly tipped it over. "Yes, I'm his mother. Is he okay?" The nurse smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "He's in recovery. The surgeon will be out in a moment to explain everything, but he's stable. He's asking for you." The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost fell to my knees. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 hours. "Thank you," I breathed. "Thank you." I grabbed my bag and chomped the dinosaur. As I followed the nurse, my phone buzzed in my hand. My heart leaped. Finally, I thought, they're checking in. I looked at the screen. It was a notification from Facebook. "Rachel tagged you in a photo." I stopped walking for a split second, confused. I tapped the notification. It opened a photo of my mother and Edward sitting on a patio, holding cocktails. The caption read, "Celebrating the start of the weekend with my favorite boy, family time relaxing." The timestamp was 5 minutes ago. While Archie was being stitched up, while I was pacing the floor praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years, they were drinking margaritas and posting about it. They weren't busy. They weren't working. They simply didn't care. The betrayal hit me harder than the exhaustion. It was a fizzy cal blow to the chest, sharper and colder than the hospital air. The next 5 days were a blur of beeping monitors, hushed whispers, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes your eyes burn. I lived in that hospital room. I slept curled up in the recliner chair that didn't actually recline, waking up every hour to check Archie's vitals or to smooth his hair when he whimpered in his sleep. Recovery was brutal. Spinal surgery on a 7-year-old is a nightmare of pain management and immobility. Archie, usually a ball of kinetic energy, was terrified to move. "It hurts, Mommy," he would cry softly, tears leaking out of the corners of his eyes. "I know, baby, I know," I would soothe him, pressing the button for the nurse. "It's going to get better, you're so brave." Through it all, my phone remained a brick of silence. Actually, that's not entirely true. It wasn't silent. It was buzzing constantly with work emails. My team was trying to handle a logistics crisis in our Asian distribution centers without me, and messages from friends. My friend Lisa dropped off a bag of takeout and fresh clothes on the second day. "I can't stay long," she whispered, hugging me tight. "But I wanted to see him. How is he?" "He's tough," I said, my voice raspy. "Lisa, thank you. You didn't have to do this." "Of course I did," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Where's Rachel? Is Edward coming by?" I looked away, focusing on the IV drip. They couldn't make it, busy week. Lisa didn't say anything, but I saw her jaw tight. She knew. Everyone knew my family dynamic, even if I tried to hide the worst of it. By day 4, the anger had started to replace the sadness. I found myself scrolling through social media during the long nights when Archie was finally asleep. I saw my mother's posts. A picture of her garden. A meme about how grandchildren are a blessing. The irony made me want to throw my phone through the window. She was farming likes on Facebook about being a grandmother, while her grandson was learning how to walk again with a walker in a hospital corridor. I saw Edward's posts, too. He was checking into a sports bar. He was complaining about the traffic. He was sharing links to get-rich-quick crypto schemes. Not a single text to me, not one. It was on the 5th day, as I was packing our bags for discharge, that the dynamic shifted in my head. I was folding Archie's tiny pajamas, my movements mechanical and sharp. "Mom," Archie asked from the bed. He was sitting up, looking pale but better. "Yeah, bug. Did Grandma call?" My heart shattered. I stopped folding. I couldn't look at him. I had to make a choice in that moment: lie to protect his feelings, or start preparing him for the reality of who his grandmother was. "No, sweetie," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Grandma didn't call. She and Uncle Edward are very busy right now." "Oh," Archie said. He looked down at his hands. "That's okay, you were here." "I will always be here," I said fiercely, turning to hug him carefully. "Always." As I held him, I thought about the house. Specifically, the 3-bedroom ranch-style house on Elm Street. The house with the nice porch and the renovated kitchen. The house where Rachel and Edward lived. For years, I had told myself that letting them live there was my duty. After Dad died, Mom had fallen apart financially, mostly because she refused to budget, and Edward was always between opportunities. So, I had used my bonuses, my savings, and my credit to buy that house. I charged them rent that didn't even cover the property taxes, let alone the mortgage. I covered the repairs. I paid for the landscaping because Edward had a bad back and couldn't mow the lawn. I had handed them a stable, beautiful life on a silver platter because I thought that's what family did. I thought we had a contract. Unspoken but binding. I provide the stability and you provide the love. I handle the money and you handle the emotional support. But looking at my son's disappointed face, I realized the contract had been breached. They were happy to take the shelter I provided, but they couldn't spare 5 seconds of empathy when my world was falling apart. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They acted like they owned the place. They decorated it, they complained about the water pressure, they hosted parties. But they had forgotten whose name was on the deed. They had forgotten that without me, that house wasn't a home, it was just an asset. And assets can be liquidated. We got home on a Tuesday. The transition from hospital care to home care was jarring. I had to arrange my living room to accommodate Archie so he wouldn't have to climb stairs. I was sleeping on the couch next to him. I was running on fumes, surviving on instant coffee and sheer willpower. I had taken 2 weeks of unpaid leave from work because I had exhausted my vacation days helping Edward out of a legal jam 6 months prior. A DUI that I had paid a lawyer to reduce to a reckless driving charge. That's the history they don't talk about at family gatherings. I have been the safety net for the family since I was 22. When I got my first big promotion, Rachel told me, "We are so proud of you, Sarah. Now you can help us fix the roof." And I did. When Edward flunked out of college and needed to pay off his student loans, I helped. When Rachel's car broke down, I bought her a reliable sedan. I justified it every time. I'm lucky, I told myself. I make good money. I should share it. But generosity can easily morph into a tax you pay to be loved. It had been 7 days since the surgery. 7 days of silence. Then at 2:00 p.m. on Wednesday, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother holding a glass of wine. Mom calling. I stared at it. The audacity was breathtaking. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Part of me wanted to answer and scream until my throat bled. I took a deep breath, walked into the kitchen so Archie wouldn't hear, and answered. "Hello," my voice was icy. "Sarah," Rachel's voice was bright, chirpy, completely oblivious. Or maybe she was pretending to be oblivious. "Finally, I've been meaning to call you all week, but you know how crazy things get. The garden club is planning the spring gala, and Edward has been having such a hard time with his allergies." I stood there, gripping the granite countertop. Allergies. My son had metal rods inserted into his spine, and she was talking about Edward's allergies. "Archie had surgery, Mom," I said, cutting her off. "A week ago." There was a pause, a short, uncomfortable silence. "Oh, right, how is the little guy? Edward said he saw something about that in the group chat, but we figured no news is good news, right? If something was wrong, you would have called us directly." The gaslighting was masterful. It was my fault for not calling them individually, apparently. "He's in a lot of pain," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "It was major surgery. He asked for you." "Oh, stop trying to make me feel guilty, Sarah," she snapped, her tone shifting instantly from chirpy to defensive. "I'm not a mind reader. Anyway, that's not why I'm calling. We have a situation here." I closed my eyes. What situation? "It's Edward," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know that business venture he started? The dropshipping thing. The one I told him was a pyramid scheme. Well, it's just hit a little snag. He borrowed some money from some loan provider online to buy inventory, and apparently the inventory never arrived. Now the loan people are calling. It's predatory, Sarah, truly awful. They're threatening to garnish his wages." "He doesn't have wages, Mom. He works part-time at a comic book store." "Exactly, that's why it's an emergency. He needs $3,000 to clear the balance and get them off his back. He's so stressed, Sarah. He hasn't slept in days." I almost laughed. It would have been a hysterical, manic laugh. Edward hadn't slept because of a scam he bought into. I hadn't slept because I was checking my son's incision for infection every 4 hours. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. You are calling me, after ignoring my son's surgery for a week, to ask for $3,000 for Edward. Family helps each other, Sarah, she said, reciting her favorite mantra. You have the money, we all know you have it. You just got that bonus last quarter. Edward is your brother, he's family, and family doesn't let family drown. Family helps each other, I repeated. Yes, exactly. So can you transfer it today? He's really panicking and his anxiety is flaring up. I don't want him to have an episode. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. She was the queen in the castle I paid for, issuing decrees to the peasant who worked the fields. She genuinely believed that my money was common property, available to be harvested whenever Edward made a mistake. She didn't hear the silence on my end as a warning. She heard it as me getting my banking app ready. I'm at the hospital follow-up right now, I lied. Let me look at my finances when I get home. Okay, but don't take too long, she said. Love you, sweetie. Give Archie a hug for me. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone warm in my hand. I looked out the window at my backyard, where Archie's swing set sat empty. Love you, sweetie. The words felt like slime. She wanted $3,000. She wanted family help. For the first time in my life, the fog of guilt that usually clouded my judgment evaporated completely. I saw them clearly. Edward wasn't unlucky. He was a leech who refused to learn because he never had to suffer consequences. Rachel wasn't a loving mother. She was a manager of resources, and I was the resource. They wanted help. Fine, I would help them. I would help them learn exactly what it costs to live in the real world. I walked over to my home office and opened the file cabinet. I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled 124 Elm Street Deeds and Title. I opened the folder and ran my finger over the lease agreement we had signed 5 years ago. It was a month-to-month lease. A formality Rachel had laughed at the time. Why do we need this paperwork, Sarah? It's just us. Just for tax purposes, Mom, I had said. But inside the lease, specifically Clause 14, Section B, was a provision about termination of tenancy. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this month-to-month agreement with 30 days written notice for any reason, including but not limited to the intent to sell the property. I looked at the document, then I looked at my banking app. I verified the balance. I had the money. I could pay Edward's debt instantly. It would be easy. It would keep the peace. But peace at the cost of my self-respect was too expensive. I sat down at my computer. I wasn't going to transfer $3,000. I was going to draft a notice to vacate. The decision to evict my own mother and brother wasn't one I made lightly. It sat heavy in my gut, a mixture of nausea and adrenaline. But every time I looked at Archie, sleeping in the makeshift bed in the living room, surrounded by pill bottles and heating pads, my resolve hardened like concrete. I didn't send the transfer immediately. I needed to be strategic. I needed to treat this not like a family squabble, but like a supply chain disruption. In my line of work, when a supplier fails to deliver critical components and then tries to hike the price, you don't negotiate. You cut them loose and find a new source. First, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with regarding the house. I hadn't been inside 124 Elm Street in 6 months. Rachel always made excuses when I offered to visit. The place is a mess, or Edward has friends over. I had respected their privacy. Now, I suspected that privacy was a shield. I called Mark, a real estate attorney I had worked with on several commercial leases. Sarah, he answered on the second ring. Everything okay? How's Archie? He's recovering, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Mark, I need you to draft a notice to quit. 30 days. No cause needed, as per the lease terms. Okay, Mark said, his voice shifting to professional mode. For which property? The Elm Street house. There was a long silence on the other end. Mark knew who lived there. Sarah, that's your mom's place. It's my place, Mark. She just lives there. And she stopped paying the rent, which was already zero in the form of basic human decency. I explained the situation briefly. I told him about the surgery. I told him about the demand for $3,000. Wow, Mark exhaled. Okay, I can have the paperwork ready by this afternoon. But Sarah, you know you have to serve this properly. If you just mail it, they can claim they never got it. You need proof of service. I know, I said. I'm going to hire a process server. I want this to be airtight. But before that, I'm going to inspect the asset. You have the right as the landlord, Mark confirmed. 24 hours notice. Draft the notice, I said. I'll handle the rest. After hanging up, I sat at my computer and opened my banking portal. I navigated to the transfer screen. I selected Edward's account, saved as a favorite, because I had sent him money so many times over the years. Amount $1. Memo for the moving van. I hovered my mouse over the send button. My heart was pounding against my ribs. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked this, the facade of the dutiful daughter would be shattered forever. I would be the villain in their narrative. They would tell everyone I was a monster. I looked over at Archie. He was awake, trying to reach his water cup without twisting his back. I jumped up and helped him, holding the straw to his lips. Thanks, Mom, he whispered. You're the best. I kissed his forehead. I'm just doing my job, kiddo. I walked back to the computer and clicked send. Then, I opened a new browser tab. I started researching Edward's business venture. Rachel had mentioned a specific company name in her rambling voicemail, Global Prestige Imports. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the truth. It wasn't a business. It was an online gambling platform that masqueraded as an investment site. There were forums full of warnings about it. Edward hadn't bought inventory. He had gambled $3,000 away. But then I dug deeper. I pulled up the public court records, a habit from my background checks at work. I searched Edward's name. My blood ran cold. There was a judgment against him from 3 months ago. A credit card company had sued him for $5,000. The address listed on the summons wasn't Elm Street. It was an address in a neighboring town. I cross-referenced the address. It was a luxury apartment complex. Why was my unemployed brother listing a luxury apartment as his address? I called the apartment complex's leasing office, putting on my best corporate verifier voice. Hi, this is Sarah from HR Verification, I lied smoothly. I'm calling to verify a past address for an applicant, Edward last name. One moment, the leasing agent said. Yes, we have him listed as a co-tenant in Unit 4B. Co-tenant, I asked, with whom? A Ms. Jessica Miller. Jessica Miller. That was his on-again, off-again girlfriend. The one Rachel told me he had broken up with because she was too high maintenance. And when did that lease end? Oh, they are current tenants, the agent said, although they are late on this month's rent. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking with rage. Edward wasn't living in the guest room at Elm Street like Rachel claimed. He was living with his girlfriend in a luxury apartment, likely using the money I sent him for bills to pay half the rent there, while Rachel lived alone in my 3-bedroom house. They were double-dipping. They were playing me for a fool on an industrial scale. The explosion happened exactly 45 minutes after the transfer went through. I was in the kitchen making soup for Archie when my phone started vibrating so hard it rattled against the counter. Mom calling. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself. I wasn't the scared daughter anymore. I was the landlord. I was the manager. I swiped green and put it on speaker. Sarah, Rachel's voice was high-pitched, trembling with a mix of confusion and indignation. Sarah, I think you made a mistake. I just got a notification for a transfer, but it says $1. Hello, Mom, I said, stirring the soup. Yes, I see the transfer cleared. That's good. $1, she screeched. Sarah, is this a joke? I told you Edward needs $3,000, the loan sharks. The gambling site, I corrected her, my voice flat. It's not a loan shark, Mom. It's a gambling site. and the inventory he bought was likely virtual poker chips. There was a stunned silence. I don't know what you're talking about. Edward is a businessman. Edward is a co-tenant at the Oaks luxury apartments with Jessica, I said, dropping the second bomb. I know he doesn't live with you full-time. I know he's been siphoning the money I send for house repairs to pay for that apartment. That's private, she sputtered. You have no right to spy on your brother. He's trying to build a life. He's building a life on my dime while my son recovers from spinal surgery, I said, my voice rising just a fraction. But that's over. The $1 wasn't a mistake, Mom. Read the memo. The memo, I heard the rustling of phone movement. For the moving van. Yes. What is that supposed to mean? Her voice dropped to a dangerous low. Are you threatening us? I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. You have forgotten that the house on Elm Street isn't yours. It's mine. I bought it. I pay the insurance. I pay the taxes. And I allowed you to live there essentially for free because we were family. We are family, she screamed. How can you do this? Over money? You have plenty of money. You're just being greedy because you're stressed about Archie. I am stressed about Archie, I yelled back, finally losing my cool. I was sitting in a waiting room for 6 hours thinking my son might be paralyzed, and you were drinking margaritas. You didn't call. You didn't text. You posted selfies. We were busy, she cried, the classic excuse falling from her lips again. We were celebrating Edwards. Celebrating what? His fraud? I cut her off. It doesn't matter. The lease is month to month. I am exercising my right to terminate it. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I'm selling the house. You can't, she gasped. This is my home I raised. Well, I've lived here for 5 years. All my friends are here. You can't just throw your mother on the street. You aren't on the street. You have 30 days. I suggest you ask Edward for some of that money back. Maybe he can cash out his poker chips. I'm not leaving, she hissed. I'm changing the locks. You can't come in here. If you change the locks, I will call the sheriff, I said calmly. And Mom, I'm coming over tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. for an inspection. If you deny me entry, that is a violation of the lease, and I will file for an emergency eviction which takes 3 days, not 30. Do you want the sheriff there tomorrow, or do you want to open the door? She started to cry then, loud, theatrical sobs that I had heard 1,000 times before. It was her trump card. The weaponized tears of a mother who feels the control slipping away. I gave you life, she wailed. I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me, by making me homeless. You have a home, I said, my voice shaking slightly as the guilt tried to claw its way back in. You just have to pay for it yourself now. I'll see you tomorrow at 10. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the sink. I felt like I had just run a marathon. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But then I heard Archie shift in the other room. Mom, is everything okay? I took a breath, wiped a single tear from my cheek, and walked into the living room. Everything is going to be fine, baby, I said. Mommy just had to take out the trash. The next morning, I pulled into the driveway of 124 Elm Street. I had asked Mark to accompany me, but he had court, so I brought the next best thing. A GoPro camera clipped to my shirt and my large, intimidating friend Dave, who worked in security. Dave wasn't there to fight. He was there to be a witness. Just stay calm, Dave said as we walked up the path. Let them scream, you just document. The grass was knee-high. I noted that immediately. I paid a landscaping service every month. Why wasn't the grass cut? I reached the front door and knocked. Inspection, I called out. The door flew open. It wasn't my mother, it was Edward. He looked disheveled, wearing a bathrobe at 10:00 a.m. His eyes were bloodshot. You've got some nerve showing up here, he sneered, blocking the doorway. Move, Edward, I said, tapping the camera on my chest. This is being recorded. I gave 24 hours notice. Move or Dave calls the police. Dave stepped forward, crossing his arms. He was 6'4". Edward looked at Dave, then at me, and stepped aside, muttering a curse word under his breath. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. It was a mix of stale cigarette smoke Mom had promised she quit years ago, cat litter, and something rotting. "Oh my God," I whispered. The living room was unrecognizable. The hardwood floors I had paid to restore were scratched and stained. There were piles of boxes everywhere, Amazon boxes, electronics boxes. "We're packing," Rachel yelled from the kitchen. She marched out, wearing a silk robe, holding a cigarette. "Since you're kicking us out." "You haven't packed a thing," I said, scanning the room. "These are just deliveries." I walked to the kitchen. The granite countertops were chipped. The sink was piled high with dirty dishes that looked weeks old. But the real shock was the backyard. I walked to the sliding glass door and looked out. The beautiful patio I had installed was gone. In its place was a half-built, rotting wooden structure. "What is that?" I pointed. "Edward was building a studio," Rachel said defensively, "for his podcast. He tore up the flagstone patio to build a shack." I felt the bile rising in my throat. Without asking me, that patio cost $10,000. "It's our house," Edward shouted from the hallway. "We should be able to do what we want." "It is not your house." I spun around to face him. "That's the point, Edward. You act like owners with none of the liability." I walked down the hall to the third bedroom, the one that was supposed to be the guest room. The door was locked. "Open it," I said. "No," Edward said. "That's my private space." "I'm the landlord. I have a key." I pulled out the master key I kept on my ring. Edward lunged for me, but Dave stepped in, putting a heavy hand on Edward's chest. "Don't do it, man," Dave warned. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. I gasped. The room had been stripped to the studs. The drywall was gone. The carpet was ripped up. In the center of the room were racks of high-end computer servers, humming loudly, connected to a tangle of extension cords running from the window. "You're crypto mining," I said, stunned. "You stripped the insulation and the drywall to cool the room for a crypto mining farm." "Energy costs are high," Edward mumbled, looking at the floor. "I needed to maximize profit." "You destroyed the room," I said, my voice trembling. "Do you have any idea how much this will cost to fix? And who is paying the electric bill?" I realized then why the electric bill, which I also paid, because Rachel claimed the house was drafty, had been $400 a month lately. "You have been stealing from me," I said, the realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. "Not just the rent. You've been stealing electricity, you've been destroying the equity. You are a parasite." "Don't call your brother a parasite," Rachel screamed, advancing on me. "He's an innovator. He's trying to make something of himself." "He's a criminal, Mom," I yelled back. "And you're an accomplice. You let him gut my house." My phone buzzed. It was a text from my Aunt Linda. "I can't believe you're kicking your mother out. She told us you're having a mental breakdown because of the surgery. Call me." "You called Linda," I looked at Rachel. "You told her I'm crazy." "I told her the truth," Rachel sniffed. The stress has made you unstable. That you're attacking us for no reason." "Okay," I said. I felt a cold, hard clarity wash over me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the large manila envelope Mark had prepared. "Here is the official notice to quit," I said, slapping it onto the kitchen table. "But given the destruction of property I just witnessed, and the illegal electrical modifications which are a fire hazard, I am amending this." I looked them both in the eye. "I'm filing for an emergency eviction based on property damage and illegal activity. You don't have 30 days. The sheriff will be here in 72 hours to escort you out. And I'm suing you, Edward, for the cost of repairs." "You wouldn't," Edward laughed nervously. "You won't sue family." I held up my phone, showing the recording light of the GoPro. "I just gathered all the evidence I need," I said. "Start packing, real packing, because if your stuff is here on Friday, it goes in a dumpster." I turned on my heel and walked out, the sound of Rachel's screaming following me down the driveway. You're dead to us, Sarah, you hear me? Dead. I got into my car, my heart hammering. I looked at Dave. You okay? He asked. No, I said, starting the engine, but I will be. I had the evidence, I had the legal ground, but as I drove away, I realized the war had just begun. Rachel wouldn't go quietly. She would scorch the earth before she let me win. But she had forgotten one thing. I was the one holding the matches. The 72 hours following my inspection of the house were a psychological siege. My phone didn't stop buzzing. It wasn't just Rachel and Edward anymore. It was the flying monkeys. Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, cousins I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, everyone had an opinion on my cruelty. How can you do this to your mother? Family sticks together, Sarah. Fix this. You have so much and you're taking their home. I didn't reply to a single message. I screenshotted every threat, every guilt trip, and forwarded them to Mark, my lawyer. Silence is a powerful weapon when your opponent is expecting a screaming match. On Friday morning, the day the emergency eviction was scheduled to be enforced, I pulled up to 124 Elm Street. I expected to see the sheriff's cruiser. Instead, I saw a used car lot. Uncle Bob's rusty pickup truck was parked on the lawn I paid to maintain. Aunt Linda's minivan was blocking the driveway. My cousin Mike's sports car was angled across the sidewalk. They weren't moving out, they were digging in. They had called a family intervention to bully me into submission. My stomach churned. I gripped the steering wheel, watching the house. I could see movement in the living room window. They were all in there, waiting for me, waiting to gang up on the greedy, ungrateful daughter. I looked at Dave, who was sitting in the passenger seat again. He looked at the cars, then at me. You want to wait for the sheriff? Dave asked. No, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. The sheriff is 20 minutes out. I want to face them first. I want them to see exactly who they are defending. I grabbed my iPad. I had spent the last 2 days compiling a digital dossier. It contained everything: the bank statements, the court records of Edward's judgments, the photos of the gutted room, and the lease for his luxury apartment. Let's go, I said. We walked up the path. I could hear voices inside, loud, overlapping, agitated. I didn't knock. I used my key. The door swung open, and the noise in the living room died instantly. It was like walking into a courtroom where the jury had already decided you were guilty. Rachel was sitting on the sofa, clutching a tissue, looking frail and devastated. Edward was standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, playing the protective son. Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, and 3 cousins were arranged in a semicircle, arms crossed, glares fixed on me. You have some nerve showing your face, Aunt Linda spat out first. She was the matriarch of the extended family, a woman who thrived on drama. We are not letting you do this, Sarah. We are not letting you throw your mother onto the street. Get out, Edward said, his voice surprisingly confident with an audience. You aren't welcome here. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked calmly to the center of the room, Dave flanking me like a silent sentinel. This is my house, I said, my voice steady. And in 20 minutes, the sheriff will be here to remove everyone who isn't on the deed. That includes all of you. We're having an intervention, Uncle Bob boomed, stepping forward. You've lost your way, girl. Money has corrupted you. You're evicting your own blood over a few missed rent payments. It's not about rent, I said, and it's not about money, it's about theft. Lies, Rachel wailed. She's lying to justify it. She's having a breakdown because of the surgery. Speaking of the surgery, I said, turning to look directly at Rachel. Did you tell them that while Archie was in the operating room for 6 hours, you were posting cocktail selfies? Did you tell them you didn't call me for 7 days? The room went quiet for a second. Linda looked at Rachel. She said she was sick with the flu, Sarah. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. She wasn't sick. She was at a patio bar. I have the timestamps. That doesn't matter, Edward shouted, trying to regain control. This is about you being a landlord from hell. Okay, I said, let's look at the facts. I walked over to the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, a TV I had bought for them 2 Christmases ago. I tapped the screen of my iPad and mirrored the display. "What are you doing?" Edward demanded, stepping forward. Dave stepped in front of him, just a subtle shift of weight, and Edward froze. "I'm showing the family where the money went," I said. The TV screen flickered to life. The first image was the photo from the GoPro footage, the 3rd bedroom, gutted to the studs, filled with humming servers. "What is that?" Uncle Bob asked, squinting. "That is, or was, the guest bedroom," I explained. Edward stripped the drywall, insulation, and flooring to build a crypto mining farm. He destroyed the electrical wiring to bypass the meter, which is why the fire inspector I called yesterday condemned that room as an immediate hazard. Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Linda looked at the screen, then at Edward. You tore up the walls." "I was going to fix it," Edward stammered. "It was an investment." I swiped to the next image, a document. "This is a court judgment from 3 months ago," I narrated. Edward was sued for $5,000 in credit card debt, but look at the address listed for the defendant. I zoomed in. The Oaks Luxury Apartments, Unit 4B. "Edward doesn't live here," I said, looking around the room. "He lives with his girlfriend in a luxury complex with a pool and a gym. He uses this house, my house, as a storage unit and a mining facility while Mom lives in the mess he creates." Rachel looked up, her face pale. "That's not true. He stays here. He helps me." "He uses you, Mom," I said softly. I swiped to the next image. It was a bank statement I had subpoenaed through a shared family trust account I still had access to. "Here are the transfers. Every time I sent you money for house repairs or groceries, 50% of it was transferred to Edward's Venmo within an hour. He's been taking half your income." The room was dead silent now. The poor victim narrative was crumbling in real time. "He told me he needed it for his business," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "He said he would pay me back double." "He gambled it, Mom," I said, showing the final slide, the transaction history for Global Prestige Imports. "He lost it all. The $3,000 you tried to extort from me last week, that wasn't for a loan shark. It was to cover his rent at the luxury apartment so he wouldn't get evicted there." I turned to the family. Aunt Linda's mouth was open. Uncle Bob was looking at his shoes. "I am not evicting my mother because I'm greedy," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "I am evicting them because they are destroying my property, lying to my face, and neglecting my son when he almost died. I am stopping the bleeding." I looked at Edward. He looked small, defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a child caught stealing from the jar. "You have 10 minutes before the sheriff arrives," I said. "I suggest you move your cars." Aunt Linda was the first to move. She didn't look at me. She walked over to Rachel, who was sobbing quietly now, real tears this time. "You lied to us, Barbara," Linda said coldly. "You said Sarah was off her meds. You didn't tell us Edward was gutting the house." "I didn't know," Rachel cried. "You knew," I cut in. "You live here, you saw the construction, you saw the servers. You enabled him because he's your golden boy and I'm just the bank." "Let's go, Bob," Linda said. She grabbed her purse. She stopped in front of me. "I'm sorry, Sarah, we didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said. One by one, the relatives filed out. They didn't help Rachel pack. They didn't offer Edward a ride. They just left, eager to distance themselves from the embarrassment. When the sheriff finally knocked on the door, only Rachel, Edward, and I were left. The deputy looked at the scene, the boxes, the tension, the crying woman. "Ms. Sarah?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "This is the property. These are the tenants." "We're leaving," Edward muttered. He grabbed a box of his computer parts. He tried to walk past me with his head high, but he couldn't meet my eyes. Rachel stood up. She looked around the living room, the home she had destroyed through negligence. She looked at me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to say, "It's okay, stay, I'll fix it." I held the door open. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. She stared at me with a look of pure venom. "You'll regret this. You'll be alone." "I was already alone," I replied. "At least now, it won't cost me $3,000 a month." She walked out. I watched them get into Edward's car, which was packed to the roof with his expensive electronics, and drive away. I closed the door, I locked it. And for the first time in 7 days, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. The aftermath of an eviction isn't like on TV. There is no immediate celebration. There is just a mess. I spent the next 2 weeks assessing the damage. The contractor I hired estimated the repairs at $40,000. The studio Edward built had to be demolished. The electrical system in the house had to be completely rewired because of the load he had put on it. The floors needed to be refinished. I sued Edward. It wasn't about getting the money back. I knew he didn't have it. It was about the principle. I secured a judgment against him that would garnish any future wages he might ever earn. It was a permanent mark on his record, a reminder that actions have consequences. Rachel ended up moving in with Aunt Linda for a week, but that didn't last. Linda, unlike me, had zero tolerance for Rachel's manipulations. Within 10 days, Rachel was in a small, one-bedroom apartment paid for by her Social Security checks. She called me twice. I didn't answer. I sold the house on Elm Street, as is, to a flipper. I took a loss on the sale price, but I didn't care. I needed to cut the anchor. The real healing, however, happened back at my own home. Archie's recovery was slow, but steady. About a month after the eviction, he was finally cleared to go back to school for half-days. I was sitting on the back porch one evening, watching him play with Chomp the dinosaur in the grass. He was moving stiffly, but he was smiling. "Mom," he called out. "Yeah, bud." He walked over and climbed onto my lap, careful of his back. "Is Grandma ever coming to visit again?" I wrapped my arms around him, resting my chin on his head. I had dreaded this question. I didn't want to poison him against his family, but I couldn't lie to him anymore. "I don't think so, sweetie," I said gently. "Grandma and Uncle Edward have to work on themselves for a while. They made some bad choices, and they need to fix them." "Like a timeout?" Archie asked. "Exactly like a big, long timeout." He thought about this for a second. "That's okay," he said. "I like it better when it's just us, and Dave is funny." I laughed. Dave had been coming over for dinner almost every night, helping me with the heavy lifting and playing video games with Archie. He wasn't family by blood, but he had shown up. He had stood by me when the people who shared my DNA were busy stealing from me. "Yeah," I said, squeezing him tight. "I like it better this way, too." I pulled out my phone. I had one final notification from the bank. The account I used to share with my mother was officially closed. The final balance had been dispersed. There was one last loose end. I opened my banking app one last time. I found the transaction history. I scrolled down to that day in the hospital, the turning point of my life. Transfer to Edward, $1 memo, for the moving van. I took a screenshot of it. I printed it out and framed it. Not to hang on the wall, but to keep in my desk drawer. It was my reminder. A reminder that my worth is not determined by how much I can give to people who take. A reminder that no is a complete sentence. And a reminder that the cheapest way to find out who really loves you is to stop paying for everything. I put the frame in the drawer and slid it shut with a satisfying click. "Hey, Mom," Archie yelled, pointing at the sky. "Look, the stars are coming out." I stood up and walked into the yard, leaving the phone, the family drama, and the ghosts of Elm Street behind me. "I see them, baby," I said, looking up at the clear, vast night. "They're beautiful." We were a small family now, just 2 people against the world. But looking at my son, healthy and safe, I realized we weren't broken. We were just finally, truly whole.